Hello everyone, welcome back to this channel, and welcome back to this series where we aim to build our own chatbot with Rasa open source. This is the fourth video of the series, where in the first video we took a gentle introduction to Rasa open source and how you can spin up your own chatbot with a simple command. The second video defined a project with project requirements, and the third video fulfilled one of those project requirements. This video will fulfill the second project requirement. If you remember, the project entails us to build a Goodkalo assistant that assists in raising the user's awareness of different packages. And we have here two packages. We have the weekly meal plan and the monthly meal plan, with an option to choose of either 1 or 2 or 3 meals, and then register any interested users to a specific meal plan. And the way we will be doing that is through the use of Rasa open source's basic forms. But before we start, let's briefly discuss how Rasa forms work. As we are trying to register a user for a meal plan, we would need to define an intent to register that user. And that intent will allow the chatbot to recognize when the user is trying to register. For example, when a user says, "I want to register," the chatbot or assistant should potentially identify that as the intent to trigger a form for us to get the required information to register the user for a specific meal plan. In our case, for sake of simplicity, let's say the manager of Goodkalo only requires two pieces of information: the type of plan, whether it's a weekly or monthly plan, and the quantity of meals, whether that's 1 or 2 or 3 meals. So after hearing the intent register, the form becomes active. And this means that the form will act similar to a loop that will keep asking for information that's missing until all the slots are filled. And the slots in our case will be the type of plan and the quantities of meals. So first, the chatbot would start by asking the user for the type of plan that they would like to register in. And the user can then respond with the type of plan. And in our case, it's a weekly plan. So the form should store that information in the first slot of type of plan. Then the chatbot would need to realize that there is a missing slot required to finish up the registration form. And so they would ask for the quantity of meals that the user would need to register in. And after obtaining that information, we would want the chatbot to confirm to the user that they have been registered. And at this point in the conversation, all the slots has been filled. Therefore, the loop of the form will stop, so as there are no more slots to be asked for, and the chatbot has all the information it needs to register the user, and therefore the form becomes inactive. So the way the basic forms work in Rasa open source is that we would need an intent to activate the registration form. It will act as an active loop that will aim to fill in the slots that we've defined as required slots to be filled in, and until we fill up all these slots, the form will remain active, and once we've filled up the required slots, the form becomes inactive. And from this example, we can clearly state that we need two sets of rules. We will need one rule that will allow the chatbot to realize that it needs to activate the registration form, and another that will continue the conversation flow after it deactivates. And in our case, we want the chatbot to reiterate the registered slots and confirm to the user that the chatbot has, in fact, registered the user. Let's also suppose that the form has been active. And when the chatbot asks the user under what kind of meal plan they would like to register for, instead of saying that they're interested in registering for a weekly or monthly plan, they would like to register for a daily plan. But this is not an option. So we would like the assistant to also recognize that such a type is not an option. And this is exactly what we will do in this video. We will be creating a custom action that validates the user's response in terms of the registration form and clarifying to the user the appropriate options for each type of slot. So without further ado, let's take a look at how we will work on this project and fulfilling this project requirement. We first need to identify the new intents that the chatbot will need to recognize. And that would include the register intent that we talked about, as well as some examples of the way the user can respond to the questions of the chatbot. We will also need to define the rules for activating and deactivating the form, and that would be in the rules.yml file. And naturally, when we define these intents, we will define new entities for the registration form, which are the type of meal plan, whether it's a weekly or monthly meal plan. And the second entity would be the quantity of the meals. We would also need to define the slots for those entities as well as the form itself in the domain.yml file. We would also need to define the responses to the user's inputs, as well as the actions that we will be defining in our rules.yml file and the actions.py. And one of those actions will be the validation action that we talked about. Then we would need to define the custom actions in the actions.py, which will be the validation action. And then we would create stories to handle these new conversational flows in the stories.yml file. We would need to train and test the Rasa bot and check if it really worked as intended. So without further ado, let's jump over to the code. So when we jump over to the code, we will start with the nlu.yml file, and we will be providing two new intents in addition to the intents that we've defined in our previous videos. And these two new intents will be the register intent and the submit intent. The register intent will contain examples for what the chatbot should listen to in order to open the registration form. So we can see that we have, I want to register for a meal plan as an example, as well as, do you have any weekly meal plans? And these are examples for starting a registration form. The submit intent contains examples of what the chatbot should listen to in order to extract the information of the registration. So as you can see, it contains examples of possible ways the user will register. So you can see here, there are multiple ways that the user can register. They can either write it out as a sentence or very short, brief sentences or phrases. It also specifies examples for the new entities that we will define in the domain.yml file. We have two new entities that we will be defining: the type of plan that we're trying to register the user in, and it's either a monthly or weekly type of meal plan, and the quantity of meals that they would like to register in. Before jumping over to the domain.yml file to define the entities, let's jump over to the rules. As we've discussed prior, we need to specify two new rules, one to activate the registration form and one to close or deactivate the registration form. To activate the registration form, we need to teach the chatbot to listen to the user for the intent register. Once it has identified the user's input as the intent register, it can go ahead and activate the registration form, and it will be in an active loop to continuously monitor if all the slots that we're trying to fill in has been filled in. As for the second rule, this is where we deactivate the form. This rule tells the chatbot when the form is complete. So the condition for this rule to work is that the registration form is active, and once we look at the registration form action and look at it as the loop has been deactivated because all the slots has been filled and that there is no more need for any requested slots, meaning that all the slots has been registered or identified in the user's inputs, then we can deactivate the form. And so the next action after deactivating the form would be to submit the, or it would be the action to utter submit, which is us telling the user that we have registered the user for the meal plan, and then we will utter back the registration slots. And these two new actions will be also defined in the domain.yml file. So let's go ahead and jump to that file. So as we've added in our nlu.yml file, we've went ahead and registered the two new intents, which is register and submit, and we also defined the new entities that we would like the chatbot to extract, which is the type plan, monthly or weekly, or quantity meals. We also went ahead and defined them in the slot section, as this is something we would want the chatbot to remember, and we have made it such that these two entities influence the conversation, and that we are getting these entities from the entities named type plan, which we have defined over here, and quantity meals. After defining the entities and slots, we can define the registration form that will look for these two entities. And so the way we define a form is that we call it, we name it, and then specify the required slots for it to fill in or look out for in the user's input. Next, let's define the two new responses that we have defined in the rules.yml file, the utter submit and the utter registration slots. And so the utter submit tells the user that the chatbot will now register you, and utter registration slots will go ahead and print out the program that the user has registered in, which is what the chatbot has extracted in terms of the entities type plan and quantity meals. We also defined two more actions, which will be the chatbot's way of asking for the information that the user has not provided. So if the user did not provide the type of plan, this is the question that the chatbot will ask the user. Similarly, if it did not still receive the information required in terms of setting the quantity meals entity or slot in the form, then it will ask it what type of or how many meals would they like to register in. We then go ahead and define the utter registration slots and utter submit, as we have already mentioned them here as actions. So we define them here as an action, and we will also create a new action. We have the validate registration form action, which is a new custom action that we will be creating to validate the input received from the user and validate whether that slot is within the valid options that the user can register in. So let's go ahead and jump over to the actions.py file and take a look at how we can define a validate or a validation custom action for our slots that we've acquired from the form. In addition to our previous action of same name that we've defined over here, we will define this validate underscore registration form. Going back to the actions.py, let's also define a list of the possible options for each type of entity. So the allowed periods would be only monthly and weekly. Similarly, for the meal plans, let's define the list of possible options that the user can choose. We can either have 1 meal, 2 meals, or 3 meals. We cannot have 4 or 5. And we've written them also in numerical format. Now let's create the custom action. We first create a class called validate registration form, and we wanted to inherit the form validation action, which we've imported over here from the Rasa SDK. From here, we recognize that the name attached to this form validator is validate registration form, and we define two functions or two methods to validate each entity. The naming convention we will be using to create these methods is validate underscore slot type. or the name of the slot. When we take a look at what this method essentially does, it first checks the slot value that is received, and it checks whether or not it is in the list that we've defined over here. And if it is not, then it utters the message clarifying the types of options that the user can register in, which is either weekly or monthly. And then we return a dictionary of the slot as none, meaning that the user still hasn't registered a type plan and slot, therefore the form will still remain active. And if this is not true, we will confirm to the user that they have been registered to this slot value. Similarly, we've done the same for the quantity meals and a slot. If the slot is not in the list that we've defined above, we will clarify what type of options that the user needs to register in. And if it is in the list that we've defined, then we will utter back the registered slot as confirmation for the user. If they did not choose the appropriate slot option, then we will return a dictionary with the value of the slot being none, meaning that the form must remain active until we reach the appropriate value. Finally, in the stories.yml folder, we've created an additional story just for the registration, assuming that the user just wants to register. And then we've created the typical path, or we've updated the typical path story that we've created in our last video. And so starting with the new registration story path, the conversation flow will be as follows. First, the chatbot identifies the user's input as a register intent, and then therefore the action of registration form will be triggered. The loop will be active, and then we will look at the slots individually and set them one by one. And then when the slot was set, or the required slots is null, indicating that we don't have any other requested slots to be filled in, then the loop will be deactivated, and we will implement the rule that we've defined of uttering the submit. Thank you, we've submitted your registration, and then we will utter back the registered slots. User says goodbye, and therefore the chatbot also utters goodbye. The story that we have created on our last video has been updated to include this part as well. So now that we took a look at each individual files and the modifications we've made to build this simple basic form to register the user, let's go ahead and train the model. So I will cd into our good Kalo chatbot, and I will train the model on this conversational flow as well as the training examples in the nlu.yml file. After training the model, in a second terminal, we will also cd into the same project directory. And after cding into that project directory, we will run the actions server, and we will run the Rasa shell command to talk to our chatbot to verify and validate that the chatbot is working as we expect. So we have the actions endpoint running on this port, and we'll give this a few minutes for it to load, or a few seconds to load. So let's test the typical conversational path. We first greet our chatbot. We will give it a name, our contact, and then Sarah wants to register. As you can see, the form has been activated. And so Sarah wants to register for a monthly meal plan. And since we did not specify the quantity of meals, we will be specifying the quantity of meals over here. And here, after deactivating the form and receiving the slots required, we have uttered submit over here. And we have uttered back the slots that the chatbot has acquired from the inputs of the user itself. And so we can say bye, and it will also greet us with a goodbye. So as you can see, we have successfully built a simple basic form that can extract information from the user and register clients. Thank you for watching this video. If you found this video useful, consider subscribing or supporting the channel through Patreon, where the link for it is in the description below. You will also find the code for this tutorial series in the description below. And as always, thank you for watching.